I just want to tell you how happy I am to be here amongst you. Your mission is a wonderful one. I'm coming as a doomsayer as well as a cheerleader. The doom and gloom has to do with what happens when people really come out of school not being able to read. There are a lot of repercussions. One of them has to do with trying to navigate one's way through a healthcare system that is intrinsically complicated. It can be quite a challenge. The cheerleading part, though, is that there's clearly hope, particularly with people like this around. So to the extent that we can get children reading, that we can get adults who've missed an opportunity and then who have the courage and the forbearance to keep on trying, it will really make quite a difference, as I hope to show. I wanted to start this afternoon with about 10 minutes inviting into the room some people that are here to talk to us through the video about their experiences navigating their way through the healthcare system. These are people who actually are functioning with marginal literacy skills and who have the courage and the grace to talk with us about it. This is a video that was produced by the American Medical Association, who's it's an organization that's actually taken this issue very seriously. So we're going to start with that, and then we'll talk a little bit about this, and then we'll prepare for the afternoon, because we can only say but so much here, but there's much more to say. Tell me what to do and I'll do it. This is going to be my savior here. He's going to make this happen. Now, let me just, while we're cranking this up, I want to tell you there are things to read on this video. So if you can, as you're doing your potato chips or whatever else, you're chewing and swallowing, actually read, because it'll enrich the experience for you. It'll give you a sense of who's speaking. They'll be speaking for themselves, but it'll give you a sense of, how old, what kind of work they do and so forth, what their reading level is. Hit play. Oh, okay. On my computer. Oh, got it. Hit it again. All right.
I was sick a lot. I was sick a lot because I probably missed dosage and didn't realize it. I was in the hospital a lot. When they did give me medicine, I didn't take it right. I admit to it. I just didn't understand them, and I didn't have the nerve to ask them the right way of doing it. Mm-hmm. I just didn't have the nerve to ask them, and I didn't want anyone to know I couldn't read.
We had a child that was physically handicapped that I had to do physical therapy on. I would show up on Tuesdays instead of Thursdays for the appointment. I would be exercising the wrong side of the body.
I had an abscess in a ear one time. Well, I had to fill out forms, and I couldn't fill out, so I didn't go. I come back home. I ended up having to go to the emergency room that night because it burst.
Health literacy is the ability to read, understand, and act on medical information. Unfortunately, millions of adult Americans lack adequate health literacy skills. The doctors, researchers, and patients in this video are real, not actors. The situations, frustrations, and complications are also real. Nearly half of Americans have health literacy challenges. Odds are some of them are your patients.
Can you imagine what it's like, you being a patient and sick, and you know that you have limited skills, okay? And you're talking to an intelligent doctor like yourselves. And these people are using words that you really don't know because they're not speaking in layman's term, okay?
Right.
Most doctors are just presuming that everybody's intelligent as they are, and that is just not the case. So what you do, you come out of that room, that examination room with this intelligent woman or man thinking, God, I hope I don't make a mistake with my medicine, because I did not understand anything he or she said to me.
The heart of the problem is a disconnect between patient ability and healthcare communication. The average American reads at an 8th grade level, but healthcare information is often communicated at a college graduate level. This disconnect leads to confusion, frustration, and a feeling of helplessness for patients and physicians. While healthcare information can confuse even highly educated patients, those most vulnerable to misunderstanding are the 1 in 5 adult Americans who are functionally illiterate.
Take one capsule.
That's right. One capsule.
One capsule. I don't know what this is.
Twice?
Twice daily.
Okay.
Okay.
So how would you take this?
When I see it's not on there telling you how to take it. It say take it twice daily, but it don't say what time to take it.
For people with limited literacy skills, the world can be a challenging one. 21% of adult Americans can't read the front page of a newspaper. 48% can't decipher a bus schedule or make sense of a bar graph. The problem is even worse in the healthcare setting, where emotions run high and vocabulary is unfamiliar.
Based on our decade of research on health literacy, our research group has documented clearly that patients who have inadequate health literacy are more likely to be hospitalized for their chronic illnesses. And this is regardless of their socioeconomic status, whether or not they have a primary care provider, regardless of how ill they are.
Can you tell me which one is which and what you take them for?
That looks like my medicine that he gave me for the morning. I take that and the little pill that, this is this is Lipian, isn't it?
He says this is
Yeah, that's
Lipium. It's
Lipium.
Lipitor.
Okay. And what do you take that medicine for?
Don't ask me. He puts me
Okay.
on there and I just take it.
Okay.
Anything he tells me to take, I'll take it.
Okay. So you trust him?
Oh, you better believe it, my life.
Research has shown that many patients have a hard time understanding basic medical instruction. 26% didn't understand when their next appointment was scheduled. 42% didn't understand instructions to take medication on an empty stomach. 86% couldn't understand the rights and responsibilities section of a Medicaid application.
Do you know what hypertension means, if I asked you what that was? Because when I look at this, I think, well, maybe you have hypertension, and I've been taking care of that for a long time.
Hypered? Hypered?
Like you're hyper? What does being hyper mean to you?
That's where you can't be still. You always got to be doing something.
Do you think I think you're hyper and have hypertension?
I don't know. That's what I consider it.
Okay.
It being,
Okay. But you know you have high blood pressure. Okay. But hypertension doesn't mean the same to you. So if I ask you if you have hypertension, you're going to just think I think you're jumping around on the chair or something like that, something different.
Just being hypered,
Okay. All right. Well, I haven't done a very good job teaching you what hypertension is, because I think you take that medicine for your hypertension, and that's one of the things that I try to work with you on is your blood pressure. And high blood pressure and hypertension, to us, is the same thing.
The same thing.
Yeah.
Low health literacy impacts patients and all aspects of the healthcare system in many ways. In financial terms, patients with low health literacy use healthcare services more often and increase healthcare costs by an estimated $50 to $73 billion every year. The cost to patients can be equally high.
At approximately 30 or 31, I went into the gynecologist and complained about part of this not working correctly. And he said, we can repair that. Great. I didn't ask all the right questions. When I showed up 2 weeks later at the admissions office at the hospital, they put enough papers in front of me. I'll bet there were 5 papers that I needed to sign. Well, I wasn't going to say, excuse me, but I don't read really well, and I certainly don't read fast, and I'm concerned with some of these words. To me, it was lines and circles over sheets and sheets and sheets. And I wasn't going to reveal my sense of stupidity, so I signed everywhere they told me to sign. Never read it. And then a couple weeks later, in the follow-up office visit, the nurse said, how are you feeling since your hysterectomy? Now, I acted as normal as I could. Inside, my mouth fell open, and I thought to myself, how could I be so stupid as to allow somebody to take part of my body, and I didn't know it?
a patient signs a consent form that they don't understand. They undergo a procedure and there's an adverse outcome that might have been one of the risks. There are legal cases clearly showing that these individuals can sue successfully in this setting because they did not give informed consent.
The majority of patients try to hide this. The majority of patients are not aware of it fully. They believe this is their fault that they don't understand.
If you have a reading problem, you go to the doctor. That can be very scary. It's like a nightmare. You walk in that office, and most people, if you realize the first thing you're going to have to do if that's your first visit is fill out a form. Your heart beats real fast. You're scared. You don't know what to do. You want to turn around and walk out. I have.
You have panic attacks. Did I do it right? Is this done right? Am I imagining things? Do I go back over and check it again? I've caught mistakes that I made, simple mistakes.
It paralyzes your thoughts completely to think that you may say something or something is put before you to read and you can't read it. I mean, you live with that on a daily basis.
People sooner or later will discover, and that is your most greatest fear. Mm-hmm. What day is it going to be when somebody discovers you can't read and write?
I would get mad about something and blame them that this is not the right place for me, you're not respecting me, and walk out. And it had nothing to do with that. It was just I need to cover that I couldn't read this. I didn't want them to know that I'm walking out because I can't read.
So you found solutions that sort of make it work and hide the real problem.
Yes.
So that others won't notice.
Right.
Doesn't that take a lot of your time?
Yes.
Doesn't it take a lot of effort for you?
A lot. Very emotionally. Yep.
It drains you?
Yep.
Okay.
It almost doesn't matter why they're having problems understanding. It's my job to overcome that barrier so that I can get them the information they need to let me help them.
While we're waiting for research to be done on this topic so that we understand the best way to educate patients, we can still use the advice of the true experts, both patients and physicians who've cared for these patients.
Does this sound a little familiar? Yeah? Okay. I need help. I push computer. Thanks. I think it's important to start with that. I have some things that I want to say, but I think you really have to listen to people who've experienced this. I mean, when people are willing to share their experiences, this is really, really important. Giving it a voice, putting a face on it is really what counts. The statistics are there, but you can get a sense of the quality of this issue. And you can see how serious this can be. This clear health communication issue. One of the last physicians said, it almost doesn't matter, why people are coming, in this situation. It's my job to respond to it. And so one of the things that I do is to talk with people who provide information, who provide care, to support them in communicating really more clearly. Because obviously this journey towards literacy is not an easy one. It's an uphill journey. So, tomorrow you could actually be able to respond to someone's needs if you have a sense that actually this is an issue. But it may take people years, actually, before they're able to read at the level that you would have to read and to navigate our healthcare system. So we've heard from consumers. This is a piece that it comes from the American Medical Association Foundation. I just want to let you know this. It's available. You can sort of go online and get it. It's a very, very good piece to raise awareness. Okay? And one of the points that I want you to see is not just those people. Now, I don't have to preach to this audience because you get that. I mean, you're convened here because you know that. Many people are not aware of that. They really have no sense of the magnitude of this issue. That 43% of the nation's adults are reading at very basic levels or below. That is astounding. Really, that's really quite stunning for many, many people. This is not a small issue. What the National Adult Literacy Survey did in 2003, this was the second one, there was another one that was done in 1993, is to give us a sense of this issue. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on stats, but just so you can sort of frame this in your mind. What they did is they divide what shall I say? Divide tasks into levels of difficulty. 1 being the easiest, and 4 being the more challenging task. The bad news, I would say, is that 14 and 29% of the population are reading or functioning at the 2 lowest levels of literacy. That's where you get that 43%. Another 44% at intermediate levels, and really only about 15% at what you would consider to be really proficient levels, which I think is really, really interesting. People in healthcare industry tend to not know that, and for those who know it, they tend very often to forget about it. It's not because they don't care, it's just that it's a very, very slippery situation. Now, if you look at this in terms of race and ethnicity, because one of the nice things about this video is it gives you a sense of the diversity. This is not just an issue of immigrants. It's not just an issue for African Americans. That many, many people are struggling with this issue. We saw that we know this. But it's very important to point out to people who are not aware of that and who have sometimes very stereotypic notions of who is struggling with this. One of the nice things about this film is, people are articulate. You look at them, you never could tell. You really don't know. People are dressed nicely and so forth. So all of those type of stereotypic notions that many people have, hopefully are dispelled. These are people that you're going to meet in any kind of practice, health, human service, and of course in the greater society. So 32% of white people in this country reading at the 2 lower levels of literacy. That's 3 out of every 10, up to 74% in terms of Hispanics. This is really quite a significant issue. In terms of age, it's also very interesting. If you look at the 65 and older group, that's 61%. And this is where it really gets critical, because these are a lot of people who are taking more and more medications. Things are beginning to not work so well. I know how that feels. And then you've got one medication, next thing you've got another. And it's really, really complicated. So they're at a special risk, older Americans. And yet you have people in childbearing age, 16 to 18, 19 to 24, 25 to 39, 48, 37%. 4 out of every 10 people really struggling with this issue. So again, it's across the board. Now, what does this have to do with health? This is a quote from Joseph Riggs, who used to be the president of the American Medical Association Foundation. Let me just point out something that people who are older here will know. People younger may not have a sense of this, but really, 10 or 15 years ago, probably now more like 20 years ago, going to the doctor was a fairly simple matter. I remember my doctor used to come with a black bag and sit next to me on the bed when I was a little girl. This was centuries ago, really a long time. Well, this is, that's not the case anymore. People maybe might get back to that at some point, but with less time with patients, advances in technology, and more pharmaceutical drugs coming into the market, staying healthy can now be a very complicated matter for many people. So if you put this in the context of, the changing healthcare system, it's not easy. When I had kids a long time ago, you got to stay in the hospital for a moment. Now they say, hi, see you later, good luck. And so it's very, very difficult. So there's an ever-increasing array of medicines, less time spent in the hospital, more and more complicated self-care regimen. You sort of have to go out and work it out for yourself. Less time spent getting information from the doctor. Doctors are pressed. They may want to talk to you for a long time, but there's a whole lot of people out there waiting for them. Continued fragmentation of care, going from inpatient to outpatient, inpatient. You may end up on 2 forms of the same medication and end up overdosing yourself. I had one doctor said, I'm not worried just about people who are having a hard time reading. I'm worried about my college professors in this system. And then there's an increasing amount of paperwork. Did you hear how many people were complaining about filling forms? Some people said, I had an abscess. I had to go home. It burst, and I went home. I couldn't fill out the form. Or somebody who said I left because I just didn't want them to know that I couldn't manage the forms. You take something like asthma. I don't know how many people know people who are dealing with that, but can you imagine gasping for breath and being in confusion about what to do? Before you had the theophylline pills, now you have inhalers with spacers. You have to know the difference between a controller and a rescue medication. You have to, have peak flow meters and all of those kinds of very, very complicated. It's good because we have the ability to do more for people who are suffering, but you have to know what you're doing. You have to be able to read instructions. Not very easy. Same thing with congestive heart failure. Before you had digoxin and diuretics. Now you have loop diuretics, you have beta blockers, ACE inhibitors, and all of these other kinds of medications that can really help, but if you get confused, you can actually get into very big trouble with that. There are a lot of lifestyle changes that you have to make. Decrease your physical activity, weigh yourself daily, things that even require quantitative literacy skills. You may need to weigh, measure things, write things down. This requires, this is a high literacy demand. I want to let you know that there's a good body of evidence here. There's lots and lots of research that's accumulated over the past 10, 15 years, and it's growing. They've taken people with high blood pressure and asked them. You heard the guy on the gentleman on the film. He said he didn't know the difference between high blood pressure and hypertension. And if you ask people about, what is high, look at that. In people with inadequate literacy skills, only about half of them really understood what what constitutes high blood pressure. With people with adequate literacy skills, more of them understood that. Still not everybody, but there's confusion. 9 in 10 understood that with people with adequate literacy skills. And what to do about it? Weight loss. Some people have high blood pressure and don't realize that weight loss is associated with high blood pressure. People with adequate literacy skills tended to know that. And you may think, well, of course, but it's very important to document this, especially if you're trying to get institutions to respond to this, in terms of changing their policies about how care is provided, how information is given. Same thing with diabetes. Just knowing what, means what high blood sugar is. People with inadequate literacy skills didn't know that 70 to 140 may be, considered to be normal, at least at that institution. 71% of people with adequate literacy skills knew that. And then what do you do about it? If your blood sugar goes low and you're sweaty and you don't know what to do because only half of the people with adequate literacy skills understood what that meant and then what to do about it, you can pass out. This is really not good. And so you have these statistics about, people are dying from high blood pressure and diabetes and so forth. But part of this has to do with simple confusion about what to do and people not communicating clearly. Let me read to you a case study. This comes out of LSU, Louisiana State University, but it happens any place in the country. This is a 66-year-old patient with high blood pressure, angina, that's chest pain, diabetes, and mild heart failure, who presented to a medicine clinic for her routine appointment. She was taking 4 separate oral medicines as well as her insulin. Her blood pressure and diabetes were poorly controlled, so her medications were adjusted, and she was scheduled to be seen the following week. Okay? At the second visit, her blood pressure and diabetes remained poorly controlled, and she had suffered 2 episodes of angina, chest pain. Her medications were again adjusted, and a 5th oral medicine was added. So people are really trying to help her get things under control. At the 3rd clinic visit, her blood pressure and diabetes were still poorly controlled, and because of worsening chest pains and heart failure, she required admission to the hospital. After initial emergent treatment, they got her stabilized. Subsequent therapy with her prescribed outpatient medical regimen, all the things that they had asked her to take originally, promptly caused hypoglycemia and hypotension. So everything plummeted. Her blood sugar fell, her blood pressure fell down, with prolongation of the hospitalization. So now she's really sick. Careful review with the patient of her medication regimen revealed she could not read her prescription labels, the numbers on the insulin syringes, or any education material that had been given to her. She had no idea how to take her medicines. Usually she took far less than the prescribed amount. So finally, she was provided appropriate one-on-one education that ensured her understanding of the medications and proper dosing. And the good news here is that her blood pressure and diabetes were well controlled at subsequent visits. So you can see what can happen here. And this is very interesting. This comes out of the AMA. There's actually a toolkit for providers. And one of the people who wrote it, who is Barry Weiss, who is a physician himself who's actually done quite a bit of research in the field of literacy and health, says that most clinicians, and I think maybe many of us, in fact, who provide service and care, think they do a good job of communicating with patients. In fact, the evidence shows that patients often misunderstand or do not understand medical information given to them by their clinicians. This lack of understanding can lead to medication errors, missed appointments, adverse medical outcomes, and even malpractice lawsuits. So this relationship between doctor and patient, and or social worker and patient, nurse and patient, the frontline staff, office staff and patient is really, really critical. People reported a deep sense of shame. You could see the shame. You know, the shame is a real issue here. Reinforced sometimes by hospital staff. Didn't you see that sign? Can't you read? Why didn't you come in and sign in and sit down like the sign said? Difficulty reading signs and locating places, just getting from one place to the other. Intimidation in filling forms and frequency of medication areas. It can get in the way of finding out what's wrong with people, helping them to get better. People may not even come in as a result of this because people either are forgetting appointments or can't read the appointment slip. And then gathering data for studies. For those of you who do gather data, this is really, really important. You have to think about the quality of your data. When people actually, can they read these long, surveys that we give them? We have to think about that. So patients with poor reading skills can really get into trouble health-wise. They're more likely to be hospitalized. You see what happened to the lady in Louisiana. Require treatment for things that could have been prevented. Ignore notices to come to care, and the consequences can actually be very grave. Now, that's health, which is, right up on the top of our list of things that we care about. But there's some legal issues and some cost issues as well. One of the monographs that we wrote with 3 health law attorneys had to do with what are some of the legal ramifications of not communicating clearly. And one of the things they pointed out to us is that one cannot assume a risk of which one is unaware. So consent forms, in terms of informed consent, you can't just throw a consent form and say, here, sign it. If people are not confused, you saw what happened, hysterectomy. I mean, please. And now, when things go wrong, then people actually, they start getting upset and say, well, you never told me this. I don't understand that. This is when you get into trouble. And attorneys estimated that clinicians' communication style and attitude are major factors in 75% of malpractice lawsuits. This is one of the earlier articles on that, but since then there's been increasing evidence that this is a legal risk issue. It's a risk management issue. And it's expensive, too. And actually, a study just came out. These were some of the initial cost estimates. They're continuing to rise. This is an expensive issue. So, many clinicians, people who are trying their best to, be useful, they will say, well, wait a minute. All these problems, and furthermore, I might get sued, and this is expensive and everything, so how can I tell? Everybody's dressed really nicely, and they're just talking so beautifully, and they just look like they know what they're doing. I ask them if they understand, and they say yes. So how can you tell? There's some clues, all kinds of clues. You sort of have to tune into this if you're aware. Sometimes people carry a lot of papers around because they can't sort them out, and they may actually give them to you and say, here, find it, whatever it is that you're looking for. But then you can see people are really trying. They're really trying to hold on to things that might be important. Failure to take medication is prescribed. Now, we go around and call people, at least in healthcare very often, call them names like non-compliant and apathetic and, I've given you this medication, you're not taking it. Well, sometimes people are really trying very hard, but they're just confused. You see, one lady said, well, she was confusing Lipitor and lithium. That is not a good thing to get confused. Those are different medications, all right? Failure to know the name of a medication. People can't pronounce hydrochlorothiazide. Well, these are my water pills. That's what people will say. Failure to ask questions after, quote, reading materials, writing with difficulty, misspelling words on forms, forgetting one's glasses. Mine are tethered to my neck, so if I forgot them, I couldn't even do this. And asking, can you fill this out for me, or let me take this home for my... So when people are backing away from the written word, a bell should go off for those of you who are providing service and care and say, well, maybe I can take a different approach here. Now, there are some assessment tools that have been developed for use in a healthcare system. One is called the Rapid Estimate of Adult Literacy in Medicine. Another is called the Test of Functional Health Literacy in Adults, and another one is called the New Vital Signs. There's some considerations. If you're going to test, you're going to have to actually then do something different. You can't just go, uncovering people's literacy issues and then just going on with business as usual. It also raises some concerns about embarrassment and shame. So it has to be, there's some limitations here that we can talk about perhaps, this afternoon in some of the breakout sessions. But what you can do instead is to design and use forms that will begin to give you some information about people as they come in. Maybe 7 to 8 questions that you really want to ask, organized in increasing levels of difficulty, maybe starting from the 5th grade or 4th grade reading level and going up. When people get to the point where they can't fill out the form, then you begin to get a sense that maybe there's a problem there. And the people in the frontline staff may want to notice that, are you having difficulties? Let me help you. And then make it part of the routine so that when they get back to people who are actually providing the information and care, you have some sense that maybe this was an issue. Get some sort of a social history. What kind of work do you do? How far did you go in school? And to weave in a question about how happy are you with how you read. You have to be very careful because obviously many people do not want to divulge that. But it requires a great deal of sensitivity and skill. And then for medications, ask people to bring their medications in. One thing you can do is ask them, bring them in. And that lady, that's what they were doing, a brown bag sort of assessment. Show me what you do with this medication. What is this medicine? Show me. Okay? So there are ways. Now, what about the skilled reader? Okay, we've been talking about, as well we should, people with marginal reading skills, people who actually literally have difficulty navigating their way through the written word. Okay? That is an issue. But you have another issue superimposed upon that. And that brings us to the issue of literacy versus health literacy. If you look in Random House Webster's Unabridged Dictionary, it'll give you 2 definitions for the word literacy. One has to do with ability, and it is, I quote, the quality or state of being literate, especially the ability to read and write. Okay, so when we talk about literacy, literal literacy, this is what we're talking about. But then there's another meaning, and it has really more to do with knowledge of a certain area. It says a person's knowledge of a particular subject or field. So, for example, you can be health literate, okay, because you can be health system savvy. You've been there, you've done that, you know how to get through the health system, and all those kinds of things. There is financial literacy. Some people who know a lot about healthcare can't balance their checkbooks and get into debt and all that sort of thing. And then there's computer literacy, which is a wonderful goal. I would love to be totally computer literate. But, those are those kinds of things that's a sort of a knowledge of an area, all right? You can have people who read very, very well. They're skilled readers, okay? But may have marginal health literacy skills. They may not know, for example, that if you give somebody an antibiotic, that you need to take it all. Because if you don't, you may end up with a drug-resistant strain that comes to pester you later. All right? They may not know, for example, that if you're in a teaching hospital, instead of getting upset because you've got first a medical student and then a resident and then the attending coming to ask you the same cotton-picking questions, that's a good thing. That's a check and balance system that actually might save your life. Now, that requires a level of sophistication. These are the nuances of that sort of body of knowledge that actually might be very, very critical for you in the long run. But many people can be very, very literate and not know that. They may not know that renal failure is kidney failure. So, issues having to do with people's ability are the literacy issues. Health literacy issues include that, but in addition to having those literacy issues, we're talking about just a body of knowledge and whether or not people are really familiar. So you can have health literacy issues and still be a strong reader. So health literacy defined is the degree to which individuals can obtain, process, and understand the basic health information and services they need to make appropriate health decisions. This is functional literacy. You've got to be able to use it. Now, again, we've been concentrating on the 14 and 29%, the 43% who are reading at the 2 lowest levels of literacy. What I want to do is to let you know that even people with higher skills in terms of reading actually are people we need to pay attention to as well. We worry very often, therefore, about offending the skilled reader when we're revising and trying to simplify things and trying to make them easier to read. And this is an example of something that a doctor might say. This was in a newspaper editorial as an example of things that might confuse people. And it says, to stage your malignancy, this is just an example, we need to perform diagnostic scans. Then, once we know the etiology, we can discuss some of the various treatment options. Okay? Simply stated, you have cancer. I need to know where it is spread. A CAT scan should tell us. And hopefully, if somebody says you have cancer, they'll say, I'm sorry to let you know. Okay, with an arm around you. And then we'll know if drugs can stop it. Now, interestingly enough, a few weeks later, a week after this article appeared in the paper, someone wrote in to say, your recent editorial, Reading for Life, makes the critical point that inadequate health care can be added to the list of risks resulting from low literacy rates. Perhaps it's time we direct equal attention to the skill deficits of, quote, experts who are unable to translate their knowledge and information into lay language. And then she goes on to say, even armed with a PhD, I found the medical language used in your example to be too difficult. So even people with PhDs might have a problem with this. Same thing in terms of health insurance. How complicated is that? Listen to this from the Wisconsin Public Health and Policy Institute. It says the emergence of consumer-driven or consumer-directed health plans, flexible spending accounts, medical savings accounts, and health reimbursement accounts has further elevated the importance of health literacy. As well, the enormous complexity of the federal Medicare prescription drug benefit and other provisions of the Medicare Modernization Act, Medicare Part D, promise to foster confusion even among highly educated enrollees. Okay? So we're dealing with a big, big issue. So let me sort of wrap this up with, I have maybe a few more minutes, with how to respond to this. There are issues of awareness, your attitudes about this, and then we can respond because some people are interacting verbally and some people are actually preparing written materials. In terms of awareness, what I want you to take away from this is that this is not a small issue. The literacy issue alone, forget health literacy with people who are skilled, just literacy issue is one of some magnitude. We're dealing with a complex healthcare system. There's an enormous amount of shame involved in this, which makes it difficult sometimes to deal with. It does have a major effect on people's health. There are cost and liability issues. And then on top of that, even people with strong reading skills can be affected by this. You also then have attitudes. Sometimes once people know this, there's a hidden attitude among some people, not in this room, of course, but it's out there. Why don't people just learn how to read? Well, we can just put that aside. But we have to know that some people actually have that attitude and they don't want to respond. And why do we have to, quote, dumb things down for them? You will encounter this from time to time, okay? So what can we do? If we're going to respond in terms of verbal teaching and counseling, you can just take a look at this picture, and I'm going to ask you, do you think that patient's going to ask that doctor what she's talking about? All right? You've got she's talking about rhinitis, and she's thinking rhinoceros. All right? She's thinking vascular, she's thinking vase, okay? So the people don't know these words. So even though you're talking, there still can be confusion. You have to point that out to people because some people say, well, if people are having a hard time reading, then we'll just talk to them. But even in verbal, you have to be sure that you're communicating clearly. So in verbal interaction, this afternoon we're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about verbal interaction and how you can really respond. And we're going to talk about these kinds of things, how to create a shame-free environment, allowing a friend or a family member to be present, how to assess what the client knows and does already and how to build on that, how to use simple and direct language, easier said than done, by the way, and how to check for true understanding, acceptance, and even feasibility. Can people do all these things that we're asking them to do? And then in terms of written materials, I'm actually going to finish on time. we're going to talk about why we still have to deal with written materials. I mean, after all, you've got forms to fill for registration and billing. God-forsaken billing. You know, you get bills. Sometimes nobody knows what they are. Like, do you mean to tell me I owe $5 million? What is this? You know, you have to sort that through. Some people actually won't come back for care because they get things that they think are bills that even aren't. So it's actually very serious. You get letters with screening results. You know, we've tested your baby at birth for A, B, and C, and here it is. Flyers, you know, to come to meetings. Sometimes they're impossible to read. And, you know, people don't come, and then they say, well, nobody cares about the meeting. Well, fix your flyer, you know, that kind of thing. Then you've got brochures on disease management that are written 10th, 11th, 12th grade reading level, and people have got diabetes. They're losing a foot. They're having all kinds of complications because they can't find something that they can read. And if we were to respond to that, we could actually do that. Forms. Look at how daunting they can be. Let me show you a before and after, and then I'll wrap it up. This is the American Heart Association that did this piece on stroke. And I can just ask you, when you open it up, this is what you see. They talk about the disease-adjusted death rate, cerebral thrombosis, and subarachnoid hemorrhage. They knew that they were missing people, and so they took a different approach. My father is alive today because I know the signs of a stroke. You can save lives, too, if you learn these signs. And then when you open it up, she says, let me tell you what happened. And then there's a little bit of a story. Really getting to the point, larger print, little white space, personalized. And even there's a didactic, sort of summary at the end. So what we're going to be talking about this afternoon in the last workshop is printed materials. What do? How do you look at text, layout, illustrations? How do you organize things so that you have a chance, a prayer of actually reading something in this lifetime? You won't have to sort of go into the next, trying to figure out what it is. And then conceptual appeal. Are we talking about things that are really important to people, or are we just giving them easy-to-read things that say very little? There are a number of factors in health communication. There's literacy, there's language, and there's culture. All of these things are important. In terms of language, we have an attitude that says, why don't they just learn English? We're dealing with that here at this conference. some people have that attitude. This was someone who was talking about having a baby. She was having a baby. She says, I know how to speak English, but when the pain came, English went right out the window. My pain was in Spanish. Okay? Can I just show you what, there's been a big response, nationwide to this. The American Medical Association has responded. I want to let you know that you're in very good company. They've done a health literacy manual for clinicians. The Institute of Medicine has responded with a full report on a prescription to end confusion. There's been a national action agenda proposed by the Partnership for Clear Health Communication, and that the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, Centers for Disease Control, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Research, a number of federal agencies have responded with efforts to really make things better. And I'll end on this note that basically what the invitation is for people who are providing care, especially in the healthcare industry, is that they have a chance to offer, in this very, very touchy issue, respect, acceptance, compassion, interest, efficient service, effective care, and clarity. And that when people are providing information in print, they have a chance to make something, if they really pay attention to this, clear and simple and brief and appealing and interesting and believable and persuasive. And one person, I will give you a last quote. We did some piece for the CDC, Centers for Disease Control. I was a piece for people who have diabetes, and it was very easy to read. We tested it in South and North Philadelphia. And one man said, this was a long time ago, he said, I have never read a complete book in my entire life. And I sat down, this thing was about 65 pages. He said, I sat down and I read this from cover to cover, and I felt good. So it means that when we do make an attempt to respond, either verbally or in writing, that people really, really appreciate it. Healthcare information is vital. People want it. And we can begin to learn how to provide it in ways that makes it really accessible to people. I think I'm done. Okay. We're going to wait for what to do next. Going to swap, okay.
Good afternoon. That was a very, very powerful presentation, Janet. I just want to thank you again. My goodness. Wow. It hit me on a personal level because I am one of those people that I have a master's degree, but I can remember time after time sitting in the doctor's office looking at a form, and to my shame, I have to admit that looking at a form and saying, I really don't know what this doctor is trying to tell me, and I would just sign it and just say, okay, I'm just going to trust my doctor. After this presentation today, Janet, I will never do that again. I will, in spite of my shame, I will ask questions. I am going to just briefly, briefly ask you to help us at the Heart of West Michigan United Way. Bob touched on it earlier this morning about our Schools of Hope program. And just to give you a little background on that, I'm going to start 3,000 years ago. 3,000 years ago, there was an ancient Hebrew poet who said one day that every hill and valley would be made low, the rough places would be made smooth, the crooked places would be made straight, and that all flesh would see the glory of God together. What he was talking about was a promised land for the Hebrew people. And ever since 1954 and Brown versus the Board of Education, what we have believed and known in the United States of America, that the promised land, the road to the promised land in the United States of America is paved through education. It is paved through literacy. However you look in Kent County, many of our children are falling farther and farther behind. If you look at the 6 miles between Forest Hill School and Grand Rapids Public Schools, you wouldn't think that 6 miles would make that much of a difference in the life of a child, but 6 miles can make a huge difference in the life of a child. Grand Rapids Public Schools, only 17% of their children are entering into kindergarten being developmentally ready. Just 6 miles away, that number is about 97%. If you look at Grand Rapids Public Schools, 32% of their students are not at grade level. Just 6 miles away, only 3% of the students are not at grade level. If you look at Grand Rapids Public Schools, 77% of their students live in poverty. Just 6 miles away, only 7% of the students live in poverty. And if you look at Grand Rapids Public Schools, they have a graduation rate of 74%. Just 6 miles away, that graduation rate is at 98%. And unfortunately, that has a human face of tragedy, a human face of trauma that we see lived out in the streets of Grand Rapids every day. Just a couple of weeks ago with the shootings that happen in our community. So many of our kids can't read, they lose hope. Meg Bennett, who's a member of our staff, who participates in the FACTS program, came back to our office one day with tears in her eyes, asked her what was wrong. Usually people are excited when they're with their mentee. Meg said that she talked to her little girl, and the little girl told her that tomorrow is going to be the best day in my life. Meg asked her why. She said, because tomorrow my mother will come home from prison. And what Meg said is that is not something that you think about happening just 6 miles away. Just 6 miles can make a difference in the life of a child, between success and failure, between job and jail, between life and death. We engaged in the Schools of Hope program because we believe that working with Grand Rapids Public Schools and the great job they do and the heroic job they do day in and day out, that we can close that 6 mile gap. We believe that as we've restructured our FACTS program to align more with a research-based, nationally known program that was able to close this achievement gap in Madison, Wisconsin, to eliminate the 6 mile gap in Dane County, that with the help of 2,000 volunteers, that we can close the 6 mile gap. With the help of 2,000 volunteers, we can make it so that not even 1 inch makes a difference in the life of a child. With 2,000 volunteers, we can make it so that all children will have a chance to succeed, regardless of their race, the color of their skin, their culture, or where they happen to live in Kent County. It is a disgrace and a shame that in Kent County, your future as a child can be determined by your zip code. That must change today. My first job in the nonprofit arena, I am very proud to say I was a counselor at a shelter for battered women. I was the only male counselor at the shelter. And we lost our translator, the person who translated from English to Spanish. And I had lost my ear and my tongue for Spanish, but I could write. And so for a short period, when a caseload came in and the woman couldn't speak English, I would write down the questions in Spanish and give it to her. I remember one night at midnight, a woman came in afraid. It was raining, thunderstorms. She had her 2 children there. She was terrified. She had just been beat up by her husband. The police had intervened. And we sat, and I was pushing the paper back and forth, trying to give it to her, trying to give her instructions. And finally it dawned on me that maybe something was wrong. Maybe this woman just couldn't read. And so I looked at her and I asked her, "Tu lees?" And she said, "No." And that's when we knew that we had to begin to intervene in her life and give her the ability to read. So we put her in a tutorial program. And when she began to read, her first step in freedom was to get out of that abusive relationship. When she began to read, she began to be empowered and empowering her children to read. When she began to read, she found a job and found financial security for the first time in her life. It was about 30 years ago that Rosa Parks said no on a bus. It's about 30 years ago that Cesar Chavez said no to migrant workers in California, that we have to do things better. And now it is time for us to stand up and to say no. And if we can say no, that we will not have a Kent County where your ability to achieve in life is determined by your zip code, where your ability to achieve in life is not determined by where you happen to live, but in Kent County it will be a place where all children, regardless of where they live, will have an equal chance and an equal opportunity at school. All of us have the ability right now to say that no. We can sign up to be FACTS volunteers, or you can refer us to a group that you may interact with. And so what I want to ask you today is that if you haven't signed up, please sign up. I want to ask you today that if you could call our office, if you're a part of any fraternity, sorority, women's group, church group, any group, Meg Bennett, Fritz Crabb, myself, we will go any place, anywhere, anytime to talk to any group to try and get people. We need an army of people, black, white, all of us coming together, Hispanic, Latino, Asian, to make a difference in this community. If we come together, we can close that 6-mile gap. If we can come together, we'll make it so that not even 1 inch makes a difference in the life of a child in Kent County. If we can come together, we can make Kent County a place where all children have an equal opportunity to succeed and to prosper in life. Thank you very much, and God bless you.